Okay, let's do a podcast. What do you say?
Peter B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, April 28th, 2017. And as usual on Fridays, we record the podcast during a live video feed on Facebook. And I'm getting indications that we are live. Let me explain one of the technical issues related to Facebook. If you do a Facebook Live video using an iPhone, you have to not use the selfie camera, but you have to use the camera that you would use to take a picture of a group across the room, right? Because when you use the selfie camera, things like a book, they appear backwards. Now, you should be able to see the title of this great book, Thomas Frank, Listen Liberal. It's a bonus book, and I'm going to give a copy away later when we open up the phone lines to talk with you. That's what we do on Friday. I spent about a half an hour recapping the top news stories that I think are important. I offer my opinions, and then we open up the phones to get yours. If you want to jot down the number, you can call in at 415-455-0102. That's 415-455-0102. And I would love to hear from you as we dip into the news today. And it looks like we are live on Facebook. Now I've got it. Okay. So my first two stories today are about the social media platform that I am currently streaming live on, Facebook. Well, I got to turn down the audio here so we don't get feedback loop. At any rate, Facebook has been named as victim 2 in an interesting scam that was run by a Lithuanian man named Evaldis Rimasauskas. And he allegedly was able to scam $100 million from Facebook and from Google through a billing scam where he, faked being a vendor to these big companies. And he set up fake email accounts. He set up fake payment accounts. And then he sent invoices to Quanta Computer saying that he was part of Facebook or part of Google. And he managed to score $100 million in payments from those two big companies. Let's see. Oh, you couldn't hear the music, huh? All right, Carl. Well, I'll see what I can do about that. Anyway, this is a fascinating situation. It appears that both Google and Facebook have recovered the money that was scammed from them. Google says they flatly recouped the funds. Facebook said it recovered the bulk of the funds shortly after the incident, which started in 2013. The guy was busted last year, and he has been interviewed by the FBI. His lawyer says, kind of roughly. So it's very interesting to see. And you know what? I'm going to just pause for a second here because I realized that I did manage to put the wrong jack into the iPhone once again today. And so you're just hearing me picked up on the phone's microphone. There we go. All right. And did I manage to reset the camera in a way that lets you see my face? Okay, we've got the technical part worked out. And Carl, thank you for the tip. He's one of my favorite listeners in Columbus, Ohio, and one of the fastest clicks on Facebook. All right, so we are continuing our live feed on Facebook. I think we've got the glitches all worked out. The other big story about Facebook today is that they have admitted that nations have tried to use Facebook as a propaganda machine during directing covert campaigns to influence public opinion by spreading fake news, misleading information, and manipulating users. Now, Facebook is acknowledging that these information operations do work. And what's kind of maddening about this report is they don't name names. They don't talk, for example, about the very active operation of the Hillary Clinton campaign on Facebook, which was run by David Brock, who started Media Matters. He ran the dark money super PAC called Correct the Record. Well, so they don't name any names, but I just did. Now, Facebook admits that during the French and American presidential elections, they had taken action against more than 30,000 fake accounts, what they call false amplifiers, which are often operated not by bots, but by humans. And we know from people who surfaced who had been part of the Correct the Record online campaign of trolls that there was a very active effort, and it was focused on Facebook. We understand from the post-election reporting that the Trump campaign was mostly focused on Twitter, because that's his weakness, as you know, his own little technical bitch. And so they had all kinds of bots that were working to amplify tweets that were either harmful to the Clinton campaign or favorable to the Trump campaign. So I think this is interesting, but it comes up short. I'd certainly like to see a lot more data here from a company that has all my data, like Facebook does. They did, however, play down the influence, saying that the reach of known operations during the U.S. election of 2016 was statistically very small compared to overall engagement on political issues. So I think we need to see a lot more about this. And while I don't want to see censorship, I don't want to see my opinions labeled as fake news by somebody who doesn't like them, and then I have to prove to Facebook or some censor somewhere that what I'm offering is credible and legitimate. So these are really thorny issues, particularly in a country like ours that we believe still has an active First Amendment. Now, the American media dropped 2 notches in the Global Media Index that was released yesterday, and they claim that it's Trump's attacks on the media that have triggered a decline in not only our own country, but in other democracies. So the United States now ranks 43rd out of 180 nations, just below Burkina Faso and just ahead of Comoros. Now, I have traveled quite a bit. I don't even know where Comoros is, or what kind of media they have, or what kind of government they have. At any rate, the report says the election of the 45th president of the U.S. set off a witch hunt against journalists. Trump's repeated diatribes against the Fourth Estate and its representatives, accusing them of being among the most dishonest human beings on earth and deliberately spreading fake news, compromise a long U.S. tradition of defending freedom of expression. And I want to defend the freedom of expression of one Barrett Brown, a journalist who spent a few years in jail after he exposed the Stratfor website. Stratfor is basically a private intelligence firm, and their reports, their data, their information often is quite well in tune with the CIA and other parts of our spy establishment in this country. So he became a symbol of an attack on press freedom. He was arrested in 2012 for the reporting he did on hacked emails from Stratfor and other outlets. And he ended up taking a plea bargain and was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in jail. He was released last November. And yesterday, as he was preparing to participate in an interview for the PBS, I believe the NewsHour, but I'm not positive, but it was some show on the public broadcasting system, he was detained. He had gone to check in, presumably with a probation or parole officer, and he was held. Now, they claim that he didn't provide the right paperwork for conducting an interview and getting approval in advance. I'm not sure of the terms of his release, so I can't really speak to that. But there's a good piece about this at The Intercept today under the byline of Alex Emmons. Now, let me explain to you that I've been covering news and politics since Nixon and the Watergate scandal. That takes us back to the early 1970s. And one of the things I've always resisted is doing news based on what day it is. That it was 16 years ago today that something happened, or 140 years ago today, or that we're at the 100-day mark of the Trump presidency. Because even the Donald has acknowledged, as he chases headlines, tries to write his own report cards saying what a great president he already is, that the 100 days is generally bullshit. FDR had a very successful first 100 days in office, and every president since has been held to a kind of standard that really is pretty meaningless. And in honor of that, I want to direct you to BuzzFeed, which is publishing today 100 lies and false statements from Trump's first 100 days. And I think that this is an excellent way to observe this generally meaningless benchmark. And, for example, they cover, let's see what the top ones are. It starts on January 21st, as Trump told the intelligence community, "I am so behind you." Then Donald Trump, lie number 2, January 21st, he bragged to the CIA that he had been on the cover of Time magazine 15 times this year, calling it an all-time record in the history of the magazine. But, in fact, he's only been on 11 times total, and Tricky Dick Nixon holds the record at 55. So I think this is a cute little send-up of the 100 days. On a much more serious note, at The Intercept, Ryan Devereaux reports that Trump targets undocumented families, not felons, in the first 100 days. And we have to be fair because Barack Obama deported a lot of people. He did try to target the deportation strategies and policies. But 2.5 million people were expelled from our country while Barack Obama was president, and many progressives and liberals were just sitting back and saying, well, it's okay because Obama did it. So I think that this is an important note, and we have been seeing families broken up. We have seen at least one dreamer deported, and we know from those who have been rounded up but may not yet have left the country that the targets are extremely broad and do not simply relate to people who've been convicted of a serious crime. There won't be a government shutdown this week, and probably not next week. They're playing chicken, they're bluffing each other, and so they've passed a short-term, 1-week temporary resolution, and they hope that Republicans are going to gather up, find the votes to repeal Obamacare. I have to say that the Democrats have been playing much better defense than I expected, and their ability to block the effort to repeal Obamacare has been successful so far. They have also succeeded in dividing the Republicans. There's a lot of infighting going on that certainly prevents the Republicans from doing even more damage. And so I think that, on that metric, the Democrats, despite not really blocking any significant confirmations, they certainly lost the Supreme Court nomination battle. They did repel one bad appointee, the guy who was going to be Labor Secretary, who came from the Carl's Jr. Burger chain. He withdrew, and that's certainly notable. But Jeff Sessions is sitting in the office of Attorney General, and Rexon Tillerson is playing the role of the Secretary of State these days. And the Democrats really weren't able to stop them. Also, if you follow the stock market, not everybody does. A lot of people don't own any stocks, and so there's no real reason for you to do so. But over the last few months, the stock market went up between November and February, and it was believed to be some sort of a Trump effect. But the market has self-corrected. Most of those gains have been returned. Not all, but in general. And despite the promise of huge tax cuts for corporate interests, the super wealthy, the first quarterly report for 2017 shows that despite what Trump says and his promise to cut regulation and let business do what business does, well, the economy grew at a rate of only 0.7%, 0.7%. And we hear Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, promoting Trump's tax plan and telling us it will pay for itself because we're going to have 3% growth in GDP every year because Trump is so fabulous and so brilliant and so beautiful. This was a decline from the 2.1% annual rate recorded in the final quarter of last year and the weakest quarterly showing in 3 years. And these are the people who blame Obama for too much regulation, for, loading up the federal deficit in order to pay for the mistakes of the freewheeling Bush administration and Republican policies that preceded him. Oh, and the Republicans have repealed and replaced one item in the first 100 days, and that would be teabagger Jim DeMint, the former senator from, South Carolina, a real knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. And it appears that he's paying the price because Obamacare is still the law of the land. And Jim DeMint is going to be replaced by who? Edwin J. Fulner, a former president of the Heritage Foundation. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And there are a lot of great people all over the world who listen and who chip in a few bucks a month, and I'm grateful to each of you. People like Tracy Williams, Andy Krieger, DGL. I don't know exactly whose name that is, but every month $5 comes in from an account called DGL Engraving. So you keep on engraving over there, DGL, and I appreciate the bucks. Let's mention one other, Jim McHugh. Would you like to hear your name mentioned as a supporter of the Peter B. Collins Podcast? I can arrange that. Just click on over to peterbcollins.com. There's a menu button no matter what device you use. When you click on that, pull it down, click Next on Become a Subscriber. That takes you to the sign-up page, and the options are laid out there, $5, $10, $20 a month, our $50 annual subscription. We've got the Peter B. Collins app at the Apple App Store, works on iPhones and iPads. And we do offer bonus books. This is the newest one, which is not yet displayed on the sign-up page at peterbcollins.com. It's Thomas Frank's Listen Liberal, and I want to invite you to listen, liberals, to the most recent interview I did with Tom Frank. It's about a month ago, and you can find it at peterbcollins.com. Just enter the name Frank in the search window, and all of my conversations with Tom Frank will be right there on the results page. Now, there's a lot of disconnect in the Trump team. Part of it is that the team is not fully staffed, and we'll get to that in a second. But the State Department has issued a kind of demand notice to UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, saying, hey, you've been freelancing. You've been saying things that we didn't authorize you to say or approve in advance. And so they're cracking down on the former governor of South Carolina, and she has been told that she can use pre-approved building blocks. So these are sentences and paragraphs that she can read from because they've already been written and approved at the State Department. But today, Rexon Tillerson, the former chairman of and CEO of ExxonMobil, went to the United Nations. And it prompts this wag to ask, did he have his remarks approved by the UN ambassador? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but it doesn't stop me from asking. So Tillerson spoke to the UN Security Council, and he called for new economic sanctions on North Korea, other painful measures. This comes as the Trump administration is signaling its willingness to bargain directly with North Korea, and that is a huge mistake. Because Trump has acknowledged that China has the most leverage over North Korea. Most of the trade with North Korea is bilateral with China, and critical infrastructure and supplies come in from China, oil, coal, etc. So to, at this point, suggest that the U.S. would get into bilateral talks with North Korea, I just think is idiotic. And it shows the amateur nature of the Trump team, including Rex Tillerson. So Tillerson said North Korea is unlikely to give up its weapons or change its bellicose behavior under current sanctions. He said new economic penalties are necessary. And this is the same guy who wants to lift sanctions on Russia to help his former company, ExxonMobil. So he's also asked other countries to stop any trade with North Korea that can indirectly fund the country's nuclear and missile programs. He said all options for responding to future provocation must remain on the table. So, he's reading from these prefab scripts, the building blocks that Nikki Haley's allowed to use. But the team member who is most off message is the guy at the top with the weird hairdo. In one of those 100 Days interviews with Reuters, Trump said yesterday, there's a chance we could end up having a major conflict with North Korea. Absolutely. And in an analytical piece written by the New York Times Washington bureau chief David Sanger, he politely asks, was Mr. Trump, in his own non-diplomatic way, building pressure to force the North into a freeze of its nuclear and missile tests, the first step toward resuming the kind of negotiations that Tillerson had spoken of earlier in the day? Or was he engaging in a bit of the madman theory that he and many of his aides reportedly admire about Nixon, who tried to convince Ho Chi Minh, the North Vietnamese leader, that Nixon might be crazy enough to drop the bomb? And, of course, Trump dropped the biggest non-nuclear weapon we have in Afghanistan 2 weeks ago, and he likes to talk tough. He seems to find that irresistible. The bully in him is really, enabled and empowered by the bully in Kim Jong-un. So I consider this combination, that the foreign policy team of the Trump administration doesn't appear to have a policy. They don't all draw on the same ideas or bullet points or talking points to discuss these very sensitive issues. And Ed Markey, the senator from Massachusetts, a Democrat, who went to the White House field trip the other day to be briefed on North Korea, the briefing was widely dismissed as pretty useless by senators who attended. And he said, what I worry most about is rapid escalation, and that is a key concern. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, China is critical to any effort to rein in North Korea, and Trump has, over that piece of cake with the Chinese president, said that he bonded, that he and Xi Jinping are great buddies. But when it comes to North Korea, we have installed a missile defense system called THAAD, T-H-A-A-D, and it is now allegedly operational. And this scares the hell out of Beijing, because they believe that this is part of a sneaky plot by the United States to build missile defense worldwide and prevent any new superpower from emerging. Now, first of all, missile defense is bullshit. It's fictional. But we've spent enough money on it, and it has worked occasionally, so that I guess people take it more seriously than they should. But this is a real impediment to progress with North Korea, and this is the kind of complexity in foreign policy that it appears like that amateurs like Trump and his appointees simply don't have the depth to deal with. And one of the problems that Tillerson has is that he is planning to abide by the budget proposal from the White House, cut the State Department budget, and there are over 200 State Department desks that are currently either filled by a holdover or unfilled. And Tillerson has said that he's going to take a walking tour, a listening tour, around the State Department complex at Foggy Bottom. And I guess he's going to decide who gets to stay or who gets to go. And it reminds me, I once worked at a radio station where they decided one day that they were going to change the format and lay off a bunch of people. And instead of having the courage to meet with people one by one, or even in a group meeting and saying, hey, Peter, you're out of here, they said, go to your desk. And if your phone doesn't ring in the next 10 minutes, go back to work. If your phone does ring, pick up the phone, and we'll tell you that you've got 10 minutes to leave the building. Meanwhile, Syria is once again the target of proxy fights, as Israel, we believe, Israel has not acknowledged, but they say that if you read between the lines, they did this yesterday. They bombed a bunch of warehouses near Damascus that they claim are storage places for weapons that are bound for the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. Now, of course, I don't have any intelligence to prove or disprove that that was a Hezbollah facility, and the Israelis are saying that it was consistent with their policy, but they can't confirm or deny the event. Eyewitnesses say that they were Israeli fighter jets that conducted the raids. Meanwhile, the split between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas is widening. And Abbas is using a really shitty tactic. He is trying to use the Israelis to basically limit the power of Hamas on the Gaza Strip. And it works this way. The Gaza Strip in general only has about 4 hours of electricity each day, and you can't predict when the power will be on or off. It's hard to keep your food refrigerated or to keep an air conditioner running or even a fan in the hot summer temperatures there when you don't have a reliable source of electricity. Well, Israel supplies, I think, about 11% of the power for Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority has notified the Israelis that they are not going to continue paying for the electric power that is being fed to Gaza. Now, some international groups have stepped in short term to keep generators running at hospitals and other facilities. But this is another divisive problem. And at this point, I can't blame the Israelis. They use a very effective divide-and-conquer strategy with the Palestinian factions. But in this case, it seems to be the two of them just doing it on their own. If you're on Facebook today, hello, you're watching the Peter B. Collins live recording of our News and Comment podcast here on Friday afternoon. And in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to open up the phone line. So if you'd like to comment on any of the issues that I've raised, any of the opinions that I've offered, and I especially want you to call if you disagree with me, get on the line now. Call in at 415-455-0102. That's right, 415-455-0102. And let me see if I can do that in Espanol. 415-455-0102. En vivo. As you may know, if you're a regular listener to my podcast, I am pretty impressed with a young journalist named Kevin Gostola. He publishes at shadowproof.com. And today, he is exposing a United Nations report regarding torture in Afghanistan. And I want you to know that the United States has spent billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, trying to train the military and the national police force in Afghanistan. And it's been an abject failure because these dudes don't fight. And a lot of them take a paycheck but don't show up. There's a lot of corruption and just a lot of real problem in the military and police force there. One thing they appear to be good at that they may have learned from their American occupiers and sponsors is, unfortunately, torture. And this new United Nations report took a look at one facility in Kandahar. Here's a quote from one of the prisoners, number 384. "I was hung from the ceiling, and 5 soldiers beat me. The head of Police District 2 was present. He also punished me. I was beaten with a cable made of a bunch of electric lines and a hose. They gave me electric shocks to the genitals. I was naked, and they threatened me with sexual assault unless I told them I was Taliban." Here's number 384 continuing. "While I was hung from the ceiling, they tied a brick to my genitals. Because of this, bleeding started from my penis. I told them they can write whatever they want, but I am not a member of Taliban. I was kept there for 10 days, continuously punished for 8 days. Here's the description from detainee 305. He said that he was held at a counterterrorism facility in Nangarhar, and that was the scene where 2 American soldiers were killed yesterday. They tried to force him to confess by placing an improvised explosive device that killed a member of the security forces. He was beaten, shocked with electricity, and then they pumped pepper in his anus and threw pepper in his eyes. That is the legacy of American occupation in Afghanistan. Lines are open if you'd like to call and make a comment. My toll-free number, no, it's not toll-free. I used to have a toll-free number, but you got to pay the toll on this. Nobody pays tolls anymore. My number is 415-455-0102. Call in and we'll talk. Here's something I'm surprised by. Just a teeny-weeny bit of our Fourth Amendment rights have been returned to us by the National Security Agency, the NSA. They're going to stop one of the most disputed forms of warrantless surveillance, the one in which it collects Americans' emails and texts to and from people overseas and that mention a foreigner under surveillance. They call this a kind of incidental collection. They were going for the foreigner, which is a legitimate target of the NSA, and they just happened to intersect with an American. And one of the issues is, if you know how email services work and how they stack up all of the messages to and from people in a certain thread, well, the court order from the super-secret FISA court had said temporarily that they couldn't look at the whole thread if there was an American in the exchanges. Then they said, well, we'll make sure that there are restrictions on this, and the surveillance court imposed some rules. And now it appears that the FISA court and the NSA have decided that they are no longer going to look at any of those communications. We got to trust them, and I don't. One of the reasons I don't trust our government is made very clear in my latest in-depth interview, and I put up one yesterday and another one today, and I hope you find time today or over the weekend to listen to both Trevor Aronson and Bo Hodai. Aronson wrote the book Terror Factory. He's been covering the frame-ups, the sting operations, the use of paid FBI informants to frame people, and the other hijinks that are part and parcel of the domestic terrorism investigations of the FBI and the related prosecutions by our Justice Department. And I asked Trevor Aronson point blank, out of almost 800 cases of so-called domestic terrorism that have been investigated or prosecuted since 9/11, how many of those represented real threats and not just fantasies or aspirations or people with low IQs who were seeking attention or who were set up by a paid FBI informant? Here's Trevor Aronson.
I mean, you can count on, your two hands the number of cases where you could fairly say that this person, presented an imminent threat, had the capacity, had the weapons, and had a plan. An example would be Najibullah Zazi, who, was in Denver making backpack bombs and had largely completed those backpack bombs and was planning to drive them across the country to New York and plant them on the subway. That's an example, but there are not many. I mean, we're talking about a dozen cases where you can point to that of the nearly 800 terrorism defendants who have been charged since 9/11.
So that's just a quick summation. My hour-long interview with Trevor Aronson is loaded with interesting information. We update the case of the Liberty City 7. That's a group of guys from Miami who are mainly trying to grab cash from the FBI informant who dangled it in front of them, and ended up being accused of a terrorist cell, pledging allegiance to al-Qaeda, and trying to blow up the Sears Tower, even though none of the individuals had ever been to Chicago or knew where the Sears Tower is. And in fact, the Sears Tower is no longer called the Sears Tower. So I highly recommend this series. Aronson wrote a 4-part package that is still on the homepage at theintercept.com. The other in-depth interview is released today to my subscribers, and it is with journalist Bo Hodai. He is a scrappy, independent investigative reporter based in Arizona, in fact, just about 30 miles from the Mexican border. And he only has a cell phone, so the audio is not as good as I would like. But you're going to hear Bo Hodai describe some of the key details of a case involving a man, a boy, a teenager, who was 14 years old, with a 6th grade level of intellect, when he was identified at a mosque and when a teacher turned over to the FBI some emails that he had written. And as a result, he ended up going into a lockdown psychiatric facility. He was drugged, and he ended up resenting the FBI. Can you imagine why? But the long and short of it is that Mahin Khan is currently serving an 8-year sentence in state prison in Arizona. And Arizona has a lower standard for terrorism cases that enabled them to convict this guy or win a conviction. He pled guilty when the Justice Department, the feds, who had followed him for 4 years, decided, we're not going to prosecute this case. Here's a clip from my conversation with Bo Hodai.
There were 2 known FBI employees in Mahin's orbit during this period of time. Those are confirmed. The one individual, Nathan, is believed by Shazia to have been an FBI informant. I don't know whether or not he's discussed in the court record because obviously they're not attaching a name to, their discussion of these FBI personnel.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so what happened with Nathan was this guy apparently hung around their mosque, presenting himself as an Afghan bodybuilding guy. And he was, according to Shazia, about 20 years old at this time, and this was not long after Mahin got out of the mental health facility, so he would still be, 14, maybe 15 years old at this time. And the situation in the Khan household was that the Khan family had taken away Mahin's cell phone because they didn't want him getting in trouble. The boy, had a stunted intellect. They knew that he had already gotten in trouble for opening his mouth, and, strange things were starting to happen. So they took away his cell phone. They didn't want their son getting into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So Nathan and subsequently other people would call him to talk to him on the Khan's family phone in the house, the landline. Yeah. And when this would happen, Shazia would pick up the phone and listen in. And she was telling me she heard Nathan talking to her son, who was, she said 14 at the time, and she believed Nathan to be 20, saying, look, why don't you come live with me? I have all these people around me, and they'll protect you from the FBI. Because Mahin had hard feelings towards the FBI. He, according to Shazia, had a good deal of resentment against them for them having taken him and committed him into the mental health facility where he was doped up on drugs that made him into a zombie who was drooling on himself.
And what's important to note is that this young man was a juvenile for the entire period of time that the FBI was monitoring him, running 2 paid informants to entrap him. And they waited until a few weeks after his 18th birthday to bust him. It's really an outrageous and insidious case. And I hope you'll listen to the interview and also read Bo Hodai's report. They're both available at peterbcollins.com. I've got lines open if you'd like to comment on the news. You got to get in soon before I wrap up the podcast today. The number's 415-455-0102, 415-455-0102. And I've got this bonus book, a copy of Thomas Frank's Listen Liberal, for the first person who calls in and gets on the air today. Again, the number's 415-455-0102. Well, it's a relief that execution week is over in Arkansas. They managed to execute 4 men before the drugs that they used to kill them reached their expiration date. And the rush to kill them bulldozed the rights of these individuals. The man who was killed last night, Kenneth Williams, admits that he committed a couple of murders, including when he busted out of prison, and he escaped from prison by putting himself in a 500-gallon barrel of hog shit. Now, that's a determined escapee. But what happened again is that his execution, as they fed him 1, 2, and then the 3rd drug, appeared to be botched. Witnesses said that he was coughing, convulsing, lurching, jerking, making sounds during the execution. One witness reported that he took 20 breaths after being injected with the drug that was supposed to stop him from breathing. But the governor's office said that the execution was flawless. I really don't see how you can use those 2 words in the same sentence. How can any execution be considered flawless. And I want to direct you to The Intercept, where Liliana Segura does a great job of covering issues of incarceration and capital punishment. And she covers a report by the Oklahoma Death Penalty Review Commission. Oklahoma currently has a moratorium on executions because they've botched several with these drug cocktails over the last few years. And the big takeaway from this commission, and these are people who support the death penalty, okay? Quote, "It is undeniable that innocent people have been sentenced to death in Oklahoma." And we know that Oklahoma is not alone. And this rush to execute people, to brandish a kind of biblical justice, is so expensive, counterproductive, inhumane, and immoral that words fail me, except when they don't. If you're going to call into the show today, you got to call right now, 415-455-0102, and we can chat about items in the news. My final story relates to the announcement this week that former President Obama has accepted a deal to be paid $400,000 for a single speech to a Wall Street group. Now, I can still hear Bernie Sanders commenting on Hillary's speeches to Goldman Sachs at $225,000 a pop. Those must have been really good speeches. Well, Obama does give good speeches. But the optics of his first big payday being from Wall Street after he didn't put a single Wall Street offender into the hoosegaw while he was president for 8 years. He didn't allow any real prosecutions of white-collar criminals. He allowed the Justice Department to extract billions of dollars from the banks that broke the law. But not a single executive was deeply investigated, prosecuted, or convicted. And so for him to take $400,000 from Cantor Fitzgerald does send the wrong message. And at The Intercept, there's an interesting backstory to Cantor Fitzgerald. As you may know, this brokerage house lost two-thirds of its 960 employees when the Twin Towers came down on 9/11/01. And as a result, Cantor Fitzgerald, trying to be a good corporate entity, said that they would pay out to the employees who died, to their families, millions of dollars. And they made a big deal out of it. And in fact, they did compensate the families of those who were killed on 9/11 to the tune of about $270,000 per victim, a total of around $180 million. But after that, Cantor Fitzgerald settled with American Airlines because it was an American Airlines plane that hit their tower. And they collected $135 million, almost as much as they had paid out to the survivors. And we are told that nobody's quite sure where that money went, but it didn't go to the families. Most likely it went to the biggest partners of the firm, including the CEO, whose name is Lutnick, and he lost a brother on 9/11. But Lutnick, let's see, do I have his first? Howard Lutnick, is believed to have received as much as $25 million. So with this in mind, and just with the general notion of Obama accepting this payday from a Wall Street firm, Trevor Noah on The Daily Show last night, I thought was a little on the shocking side. I like Trevor Noah. He's not Jon Stewart. They're very different people. But he brings a real interesting sensibility to the show. He's great at trick voices, mimicking people, and he also has a stunning knowledge of American politics for a guy who came from South Africa just, about less than 2 years ago. But I was really distressed because Trevor Noah played the race card. He basically said that people who criticize Barack Obama for taking $400,000 from Cantor Fitzgerald for a single speech are picking on him because he's the black guy. And I'm really offended by that, because I've been critical of every president who has cashed in, starting with Bill Clinton. George W. Bush has not really been out there collecting big money, but he has given some paid speeches to some ugly groups. And I was sharply critical of Hillary Clinton for cashing in for millions and millions of dollars that she and Bill don't need. after she left the Secretary of State post and before she ran for president. And so I'm consistent. And the fact that Obama is not white, the fact that he is half black, does not play any part in my criticism of his decision to accept this gig. Well, I'm going to wrap up now. Thanks for joining me today for our live video feed on Facebook. It'll be available for replay. Share it with your friends. Let them know that it's out there. And next week we'll do it again. Maybe we'll get some phone calls. Thanks for listening and for watching. I'm your humble host, Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.